out of the office, get away from the computer, and go out and walk the ground and see the materials. This happens to be the places that I've worked in. David Price was the principal geologist at Wimpy until the mid-1970s, and then went to be the professor of engineering geology at Delft University in the Netherlands. And when he died, Mike de Freitas compiled his lecture notes and published one of the best textbooks on engineering geology you can hope for. It's a very readable account, rich in experience and thin on terminology and theory. So it's actually a very practical, understandable book. So get out there, become familiar with the materials, see the processes, go to a volcano, walk on a glacier, experience an earthquake, and then you'll have a much better idea of what these things look like in the geological record, and therefore how you can interpret them and make sure that you don't fall foul of them. Sadly, and this is from Mike de Freitas' prologue to David Price's book on engineering geology, sadly we learn, but we learn from mistakes. It's the experience of catastrophe that matures the engineering geologist. There is nothing steady state about geological processes, the idea of uniformitarianism and so on. Not even the slow and silent pollution of groundwater, as you began to get an inkling in on Friday. Each of the pictures on this slide tells a story. Top left, the front cover of the public inquiry into the failure of the Carsington Dam. The top right, picture of the Fold crater, the Second World War's largest non-nuclear explosion. Irrigation in Israel. Picture of Mantor from the sky. The explosion of landfill gas at Losco in Derbyshire. The fatal explosion of a pumping station at Abbeystead. 42 people down there in a public relations exercise, 16 die, and the remainder are all injured, including children. This was a public relations exercise by the water company. Come and have a look at our new facility. It's a controversial pump storage scheme, and while they were under the ground, the facility exploded. The likely source of the methane that caused the explosion was a natural repository about a mile down. And the methane accumulated over time in the run-up to the public visit. As part of the visit, they switched on the pumps to show them what the noise was like and so on, and that flushed the methane into the chamber where everybody was. And who knows, somebody might have been wearing a metal heel, or a watch might have sparked, there was a source of ignition, and the thing exploded. And at the bottom right-hand corner over there is a picture of Chernobyl. Next Friday, this coming Friday, sorry, on Friday afternoon, there's a paper looking at the lessons we can learn from the Fukushima incident, the nuclear power station in Japan. That led to Germany abandoning nuclear power. The government-sponsored report by the Health and Safety Executive says there is nothing to stop the UK continuing with this nuclear power programme. And if you want to find out more about that, come along on Friday afternoon. John Nill did a PhD in metamorphic geology in the Lewisian of Scotland in the 1950s, and ended up as a lecturer at Imperial College, the country's first professor of engineering geology. And he was an expert witness during the Abbeystead inquiry. We managed to divert him. He was my tutor at Imperial during that time. So every supervision, we would divert him off the topic of the supervision and onto the inquiry. How are things going, John? And he would tell us what the latest expert witness arguments were all about. This is back in 1971. He gave a definition of engineering geology, linking the subject clearly to the industrial application of geology in the broad sense. It's about being useful and about being usable. It can, however, be viewed in an alternative way, in that much of the activity of engineering geologists was people-oriented and consequently related to environmental or social geology. I don't have any of you guys as tutees. I have 17 tutees, and they are all doing BA. What those poor souls make of their professor in engineering geology teaching them about cultural geography and the niceties of space and place is a little bit beyond me. However, my recurring theme to them is they cannot be geographers, and there will be a very limited use to society if they ignore the physical side of the subject. The same applies to you guys. You're probably more interested in the rivers, or the landslides, or the soils, than in the flooding, or the planning, or the legal side of things. But you must embrace the whole of your subject if you are to be powerful, influential geographers like Ruth Allington has been for over 3 decades. If you are to take your place in society to make a difference. Engineering geologists own the ground model. The ground model tells planners and engineers and architects and insurers how strong the ground is, how deformable it is, how durable it is, and how permeable it is to a variety of different liquids. They define the boundaries between zones of internally homogeneous behaviour. They define the processes that are operating that will change the boundaries and change those properties. And those processes can be as trivial as water percolating through the soil, right the way through to plate tectonic movements. Those of you who end up doing biogeography with Richard Field and Chris Labers in later years will study the geography of islands. And this morning on the BBC website, there is a story of a young island that's being formed off the coast of the Canaries. And in a recent geographical magazine, there is the story of the formation of Hispaniola in the Caribbean. And it is possible that the origins of that island were a piece of continental debris that got entrained in the mantle and carried 1,600 kilometres before it eventually kind of popped up and became Hispaniola. So the processes can be very, very small, local, short-lived, right the way through to the very large, long-term tectonic. It's important to understand what those processes are creating in terms of fractures, recementation, precipitation, dissolution, in terms of consolidation and compaction, because that will influence the strength of the ground, the deformability of the ground, the durability of the ground, and the permeability. Get any one of those wrong, and your engineering structure is at risk, as we'll see. The ground model, the simplification of the ground, is the basis for then working out how the engineering structure will interact with that ground, and therefore the design of that structure so that it will behave as we want it to. The building will stand up, the tunnel will stay open, the slope will remain stable, the water will be produced in usable quantities. Any of you guys into horse racing? No? Far too sensible to waste your money on that kind of thing. Okay. You'll see why in a second. Foslas is a tiny little village near Llanelli in southwest Wales. South Wales, long history of coal mining, very strong ethos of underground, deep coal mining. But Foslas was not an area that lent itself to underground mining.